Okay, so I'm sure a number of you are already excited to ask questions to our three distinguished panelists. So I'd like to invite members of our audience, students, and also our partners from the industry. This is your time to ask our panelists about any questions you may have about their presentations. Okay, so while we're waiting for them to frame their questions, I wanted to ask our three speakers, most especially Mr. David and Ms. Lim, as urban centers actually that's experience growth in tourism, how do we manage now the flows of the visitor volume so that we eventually avoid the conflicts that may arise between residents and tourists because of congestion or over tourism, and because of it's a result of a very successful, let's say, media promotions?
So we also have at WTDC been doing some research looking at destination management in terms of flows of tourists, and I think there's a number of cities around the world and hotspots in terms of tourist sites where they're starting to experience some real pressures in terms of too many tourists arriving at peak times. So I think what we've been doing, so places like Barcelona and Venice, Taj Mahal, examples like that. One of the things that we're recommending is that you have a plan. So you get all the relevant stakeholders together, including local residents, and you also involve key components of the industry. So, for example, cruise is often a cause of some real issues in terms of over-tourism. And then you just agree a plan, essentially. You, for example, reschedule the arrivals of cruise ships, or you limit the number of passengers arriving at a particular point in time. So I think really it's about developing a plan, getting all the relevant stakeholders together, and then making sure you're joined up.
Thank you very much, Mr. David, for the response. Ms. Lim, in terms of, let's say, Iloilo, so we've seen actually the growth of Iloilo over the years. So what are, let's say, some mitigating plans for over-tourism?
Well, so far we're lucky that there has not been too many tourists yet, so there's no overcrowding as other destinations have experienced, like Boracay, where the carrying capacity has already been exceeded. But realizing that the growth will come, then there has to be a management plan on how to regulate the tourists in popular sites. So one way would be to disperse them by having a lot of options and not just having one particular site as the attraction. There has to be a lot of attractions so that tourists have an option to go to several tours in a day. And other destinations have used this, make the destination expensive, have lower volume of tourists by making the destination expensive. And I think our friend Robin might talk about that when he talks about Bhutan. That's one strategy. There are many. In several sites abroad, for example, if you cannot really look at the real thing or the real attraction because it is so sensitive and fragile, you can have reproductions of that, and that's where the mass of tourists go. And if you want to see the real thing, like the Lascaux caves, for example, in France, then that will be a very, very expensive proposition.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Cortez, would you like to add to those responses?
One key point Ms. Lim presented earlier was the organized tours. And if I may contrast again the experience in Siargao and Coron, is that Coron is very organized, whereas Siargao is a little, you're on your own. You go to a port, you rent a boat, you go to wherever, and you just pay the landing fee. There's a central regulation at the port. You pay that, including the boat, and then you also pay every landing fee, and which made me wonder in Siargao, because they collect landing fees, but that's it. You know, the moment the local government issues you the Republic of the Philippines receipt, he disappears. You know, okay, you already paid 100 or 150, and then he's gone. Whereas in Coron, when you pay the landing fee to a Tagbanwa, who is really the owner of the island or the beach, you know, somebody is looking after you. Okay, and then later on you would learn that the money goes to a community-based model where the fellow ethnic groups also benefit from that landing fee or entrance to the site. I would just like to point out that they have a different level of organization when it comes to tours, and based on your expectations, you would not know that unless you go there. So maybe lower down your expectations when you go to a particular destination, and then
I think Dr. Cortez, the emphasis there would be really to engage also these other islands in those areas so that we could spread the benefits from the urban core towards more of those islands in places that you mentioned, like those of Coron and Siargao.
Definitely.
So maybe I would like
we don't see that in the Instagram post.
Yeah, that's true. So thank you for that. Now I'd like to ask again our participants if you have any questions that you'd like to direct to our panelists. Yes, please. And then the second would be.
Good morning.
Please state your name and your affiliation.
Hello po. Good morning, everyone, and to the speakers. I am Paolo Divisa, studying international studies here in Beda. This is a question I would like to ask for Mr. David Nigel. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Hello. Can I ask po, what are the top 3 areas that Manila should address for it to be ready for tourism?
Okay, so I think Manila is, if you talk about the Metro Manila, obviously 16 cities. So maybe I'll just talk about Manila City, because I think that's a little bit more manageable in your mind. And I think there's some evidence that already this is being addressed, and I think we saw some examples on some of the earlier presentations as well. For example, the cleanliness and the tidiness of the city. I know that since the mayor's come in, he's had a sort of a real blitz in terms of a real cleanup of the city, and I think that's very important. So I think they've started well. I think in terms of some of the other key areas, I would say probably in the context of the city of Manila, maybe the sort of infrastructure side of things, the roads, and the general sort of ability for people to move around the city. I think that could be improved. And I think, maybe I'll save my third point to a general point around involving all the key people in coming together, which I think has also started, and there was a big meeting yesterday involving residents as well, to really identify some of the key things that need to be improved. And we saw on the Readiness report, I think that looks at four key areas: the people aspect, and that's availability of the right people trained and with the right skills. And I think Manila City is probably well placed to have that. It's about the infrastructure, and I think we talked about maybe improvements there. I think it's about the stability. I think you've certainly got that here. And the general environment. So probably improvements to the general environment are required. So I think you're on the course to really do the right things and improve the environment in Manila City.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have another question.
Good morning. I am Rosan from Lyceum of the Philippines, University, Manila. My question is addressed to Dr. Cortez. My question, sir, is I would like you to comment about or on vloggers and travel shows that are featuring destinations in the Philippines that are not yet ready to accept tourism.
That's a good point. I actually started blogging as well. You know, I'm like a millennial uncle, and basically my what I would like, my comment on these vloggers is that they make the experience look and sound so awesome. Nobody wants to show the perils or the dangers or the ugly, the dirty, the difficult side, because it's a lifestyle that they are trying to promote. And most millennials are trying to adhere, which is the wrong side of it. And that's why there should be more information, there should be local community support to show and manage expectations, because for you to do your spelunking or to do your picture on the cliff or probably dive on the cliff, you should know that there are limited resources and probably the destination is not yet ready for any free diving facility. There is no disaster response, emergency response, and probably local community hospital is not equipped yet for those kind of accidents. So my point is be careful in promoting the content, and for millennials not to believe everything. Don't believe everything on the internet because it's expensive, it's not easy, it's an image in your mind that's not true.
Thank you. Nurse, would you like to add to that? Okay. We have a question from the lady here in front.
Good morning. I'm Patricia from LPU Cavite. So my question is for Ms. Narzalina. So as what you've said earlier that Iloilo is a slumber place before, any recommendations or any steps for Manila to achieve that kind of accessible place?
I just understand your question. Okay, you would like to know how Manila can be like Iloilo?
Not that thing. I mean, in terms of traffic, as what you've said, you have a bicycle lane.
Oh, okay. Well, taking off from what Nigel said, that one of the things that Manila has to do is work on its physical infrastructure. I think there should be pedestrian lanes before bicycle lanes. It's hard to walk around Manila, right? We were blessed that when parts of the city were designed, there was already a plan for pedestrian and bicycle lanes. No? So I don't know how Manila can do it because it's a massive redevelopment if we have to add that kind of infrastructure. No? So maybe it's better if we do it in new cities or up and coming cities.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Robin, an IU student from San Beda College, Alabang. My question is for Mr. David. So, you talked about how for urban cities to be prepared for tourism in the future, there should be certain technologies or automation. So, long lines would be cut because biometrics would be taken instead, fingerprints, face scanning. So my question is, do you think technology or automation, for that matter, will negatively affect the number of job opportunities in the tourism industry? And if so, how can we respond to this? Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's a really good question. Very good question. I think definitely, I think technology has a role to play. And all of us live our lives so differently now using technology, and just the simple example of the mobile phone. It will definitely cut jobs wherever you look, and not just obviously in our sector, but all sectors you have automation already. I think what I would say in terms of travel and tourism is, whilst it will remove some jobs, I think it will be more the jobs that are involved in sort of processing, the jobs that don't really add a lot of value. So, for example, we talk about biometric technology. I think we advocate that, given the volumes of people you saw on my figures, that the huge growth we're going to see in people traveling and international travelers, the current infrastructure, particularly at airports and ports, cannot cope with those sort of volumes. We cannot build new airports fast enough to deal with the future volumes of tourists. So in order to accommodate them, we're going to have to use technology to dramatically transform the way in which people travel. And if you think when you travel and you have to present your passport so many times, it is so inefficient to a process to have to do that. Much the same way that e-tickets have replaced paper tickets now, and your boarding pass is on your phone. So I think on those sort of more manual-based processing, they will be replaced with technology. Using biometric technology, there are already trials out there where you can go through airports without having to present your passport. And WTDC is advocating not just airside, but also on the land side, the non-air arrangements, use of biometric technology, for example, when you're checking into your hotels, when you're taking your car hire, etc. The point I would say, though, I think that's unique about the travel and tourism sector is that hospitality, is the looking, the caring of people, and no more, no better place do you see it than in the Philippines, where you have this amazing sort of hospitality that's genuine, it's from the heart. I think those roles are always going to survive. They are critical to the experience. It's the roles that are more about the sort of more mundane aspects of travel that you will see those being replaced with automation.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we can entertain one last question from our participants. Yes. The lady at the back, and then, okay, the gentleman.
Good morning. My name is Tasha from International Studies of Beda College, Alabang. My question is for Secretary Narzalina. How do you ensure the continuity of tourism projects in Iloilo given the changing phases of politics? Thank you.
That's a very good question. The involvement of the private sector is very, very important. So if our mayor changes 3 years from now, the private sector can carry on the plans and programs that have already been instituted during this term. So a very strong private sector participation is important in any project, not just tourism. And as I mentioned also, the community's involvement in the process, in the planning, and in the execution of the tourism plan makes that plan sustainable.
Thank you, Ms. Thank you. The last question before we conclude this panel session.
Good morning, everyone. I'm King Radzwan from LPU Manila. So this question is for everyone. New Clark Green City is the venue for Southeast Asian Game this year. It is a smart city, but there are Aita community or the natives that were displaced. How can we address this kind of issue in building new cities in the suburban and rural areas in the country? Address the question to all of them.
All right. Maybe I should start. I did see that post on Facebook, and I was wondering whether it was fake news. I don't know whether, in fact, the ATAs were displaced, because if you talk to Vince Dizon, who is the head of BCDA, he said that the ATAs were consulted and were part of the planning process, and that relocation sites were made available to them. So I think that we'll have to see both sides of the question. But of course, the indigenous peoples should always be part of the development process, because they were the original settlers in that land. You know, you might have a smart city, but if the people there are not, the original settlers are not part of it, then it is really not a real development. No? So, as you will see in the next presentation of our mayor, when the plan to redevelop, and clean up the Ilo River was conceived, the first thing that was addressed was the relocation of the informal settlers who were living on the banks of the river. And I think that's why it's a good model of a successful development. So I think maybe we should interview BCDA and find out what they've done for the indigenous peoples in the new city.
I think this team gave a very good suggestion as part of the way forward. Let's first check what BCDA has actually done, and then maybe TKC can also find out more about this. So at this point, I'd like to conclude our panel session on measuring preparedness of cities for tourism growth. So on behalf of the Tourism Knowledge Center, I'd like to thank Mr. David, Ms. Narzalina, and of course Dr. Cortez for joining us today. And thank you so much.